Welcome to Deep Pockets, the podcast for exploring how basic science, once created in a lab and funded by public means, is fueling the economy with completely new private industries. Deep Pockets is created by Petra Soderling.
So my guest today is Celia Merzbacher, the QED-C Executive Director at SRI International. QED-C stands for Quantum Economic Development Consortium, which aims to enable and grow a robust commercial quantum-based industry and associated supply chain in the United States. In addition to SRI International, she has an extensive career in other labs, such as Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Semiconductor Research Corporation, and Naval Research Laboratory. Ms. Merzbacher also served as Assistant Director for the Technology R&D at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the George W. Bush administration. She has a Bachelor of Science in Geology, Earth Science from Brown University and a PhD in Geochemistry from Penn State University. Welcome to Deep Pockets, Celia.
Thank you, Petra. It's great to be with you.
Before we go into quantum, tell me how you got from geochemistry, which I understand like earth minerals, to semiconductors and eventually into quantum physics.
Well, it may sound like an unusual path, but there is a connection through materials. And so I started with a passion for understanding minerals and, in fact, mostly non-crystalline materials, so volcanic materials, things like that. And studying these glassy earth materials led me to studying man-made glassy materials. And I went after graduate school to do a postdoc where I studied actually the glassy material that was being proposed for storing nuclear waste. And from there, I continued my career in the materials science side of things. So it's not such a different set of skills and knowledge that you need to study earth materials or man-made materials, it turns out. But from there, I gradually got more interested in the sort of policy and management of the science enterprise and had an opportunity to go to the White House, where I was overseeing the implementation of the U.S. National Nanotechnology Initiative. And after several years in that role, I left government and went, as you noted, to the semiconductor industry and worked at a consortium of the semiconductor industry that was focused on bringing research into the industry use. So it was really an interesting model that I studied while I was there, where the industry was funding the research by the universities, in addition and really in partnership with government, which plays such an important role in funding university research. I really liked that business, if you will, of bringing people together. And so when I had the opportunity to come to help start the QED-C and create a new community, a consortium of all the different stakeholders that are going to be important for the realization of the potential of quantum for really practical things, it was a great fit. And it really brought together my background in big government programs, because there is a lot of government activity and investment, but also the private sector. And so that's what I'm busy with today, is helping to connect these different parts of the innovation ecosystem to accelerate progress, to take advantage of all the advances that are being made.
Yes, I love how you're bridging together the government funding, research, and then commercial business opportunities by companies, because that's what it's all about and that's how it works. So let's go into quantum. You and I, we've had some discussions about the quantum industry in the US and Europe before, and you also recently hosted a webinar on quantum technologies in China. The topic that I invited you to speak about is public funding in quantum computing. Tell me what you see happening in the world in this field today.
Well, there's obviously a lot of interest and excitement in the scientific community, and more and more in the industry, in the commercial side. And so you can see in the news information about programs that are being created in countries all around the world. Quantum information science research and early stage development is happening in all parts of the globe. And it's hard to compare sometimes because some programs last for several years. Some reports are for some annual investment or some particular center. So I don't think it's worth focusing too much or trying to compare these different efforts, but just recognizing how much priority is being given by different countries and regions in the investments that need to be made. And it is still very much early days for the industry. There are many scientific and engineering challenges that are going to need to be solved. And some of those are competitive, and you see individual companies trying to get some, advantage and compete. But also there are many common challenges where individual organizations perhaps don't have to have the proprietary ownership. And that's where organizations like QED-C can come in and help by bringing together and sort of spreading the work among all the different parts of the ecosystem. So there's a lot going on, and connecting those and crossing borders where it makes sense is going to be necessary. On the other hand, there are the playing field needs to be level. And so it's important for partnerships to be trusted and to build a trusted community. And that takes some evidence that you're abiding by international norms, you're sort of behaving in a reciprocal way when it comes to scientific exchanges and so on. And so at QED-C, we've identified some principles and values that we expect all of our members to abide by. And so that means that perhaps not everyone from around the entire world, including perhaps someone who's got Chinese control, would not be part of the consortium today. So I think it's important for the players to make decisions about partnerships with all the information, and that way they're going to find themselves in a sort of healthy business environment down the road.
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. Let me start from the beginning. You mentioned quantum information science and systems, and that's where US is investing heavily. And you did also say that we shouldn't compare, but I'm still going to ask you, do you feel like the US is putting more money on the information systems than other regions? And by that, I mean, there's a lot of research on hardware, photonics, different architectures.
I think that there's sort of never enough. Everybody is, limited in their resources at some point. And you can find some information. The U.S. is actually quite good and diligent about reporting its investments. So you can go to their quantum.gov website and you can get their annual report, which includes a report of how much they're spending in different parts of the quantum science spectrum, from communications and sensing to computing and sort of fundamental science. I'm not sure all countries do that kind of reporting. So it's hard to say, but the U.S. is spending, in fact, at a higher level than is called for by the Congress. So in the legislation that was passed, they laid out some proposed spending plan. And I think at this point, the government is actually spending more than was called for. So there's obviously a priority being given, and you hope that the system by which proposals are reviewed and selected for funding is working, and that they're choosing the sort of most important and highest priority projects at this time.
Yeah, you mentioned level playing field. I'm not sure if you mean the reporting being part of that equation. I'm going to go back to what you talked about, the semiconductor industry consortium in QED-C is sort of an industry consortium. How do you see the role of standards in doing this level playing field globally? Do you feel like we're on the right path with standards, or there's still a long way to go?
Well, the answer is it depends. Some applications of quantum, you could argue, are quite advanced in a way. If you include things like the use of quantum systems for timekeeping and atomic clocks and certain types of sensors, then the technology is being used in applications today. And in something like timekeeping, especially, there obviously have to be standards because those systems are really used globally for global positioning and banking transactions. And so those kinds of areas are going to already be developing and using standards. Other technologies like quantum computing is still there isn't a single technology approach. It's too early to say that we're going to sort of limit ourselves or use only one approach. And so those areas are really not being standardized today, other than developing perhaps agreed upon terminologies and use of certain terms to mean something. And just an example, companies that make and sell components for maybe today mostly research, so optical components, lasers, electronic subsystems, and so on, often they are being asked to provide technology to operate under conditions that it wasn't designed for originally, at low temperature, for instance. So does this electronic device, when you put it at very low temperature, still perform the way that you put on the specification? You don't know. And so there's really a lot of, when you say standards, you sort of think of a certain reason or set of standards, but these kinds of ability to verify and validate and specify exactly what the performance is and what the behavior and characteristics of a particular piece of equipment will be for purposes of using it in a quantum system, that's an area where standards are needed. And that's an area where standards could probably be, or agreed upon performance and ways of characterizing and specifying could be established.
That sounds like very, very early stages when you talk about agreeing on common terminology and just basically agreeing on what you described to me almost sounds like the core basics of peer-reviewed science. What does peer-reviewed science mean? That it means to be repeatable. So coming back to the public funding, I have looked into the amounts of money that governments are putting into this globally. And to me, it looks like the US stands out in a way how much private companies work together with the government. And I'll give you the example, the Quantum Initiative Act, what was it called? The 1.2 billion that was budgeted a couple of years ago. About 600 million of that was awarded last year for quantum information systems, and private companies put up a considerable amount of money to match the US government funding. And I'm not seeing this happening in other parts of the world. How do you see that?
I think that different countries are taking different approaches. I have recently learned about a new fund that is being set up in Canada and run by the Canadian Business Development Bank, or the Business Development Bank of Canada. I think it's maybe $200 million, and it's really aimed at investing in startups and early stage companies. So, that's one model, for example. In the UK, which I just had the opportunity to visit, and they have every year a big quantum showcase where a lot of companies that have started in universities but are now spinning out and creating businesses are featured, and it's really impressive what that initial government funding has produced already. So I think that there are a lot of different ways that governments are trying to build on the investment in basic research and bridge to the eventual, private sector. There's always a handoff that has to happen at some point along the way. And different countries and governments have different sort of principles and policies about that. But I think that there's a lot of evidence for partnership at various levels by governments around the world.
The handoff, can you describe how the handoff happens in the United States from government labs to commercial players? Tech transfer?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain mechanisms by which those spin-outs and ideas can be nurtured initially. There are SBIR awards. So all of the agencies that fund research have to set aside a certain amount for small business innovation research. And those can be very helpful in getting a company to the next level. There are programs like the I-Corps program, which initially was run out of the National Science Foundation, but now is being replicated in other departments as well. That is focused on giving a researcher who has come up with some discovery, some invention, a little bit of help kind of before they even are ready for an SBIR. So very early stage help in identifying markets and customers, things that researchers often don't have much understanding about how to do. So that's a program in the US to help bridge to the sort of more commercial world. There are programs at agencies like the Defense Department, in agencies like DARPA and also in the Air Force and Navy and so on, where they are a customer, right? The defense sector, the government is actually a customer in that situation. And so when they have a need for something that has certain capabilities, they can go out and pay companies to help develop to prototype and really do the early stage R&D. And so that's another area where there can be significant government funding available, for example.
You described the Canadian initiative. Let me ask you this. We had another guest here recently, Andre Koenig, and he spoke about the private funding in quantum computing right now. And he was very concerned about the amount of private money going into quantum computing and the hype around it. Now, when you represent the government and government funding, do you feel like the government is in any way responsible for this hype, or do you feel like that's the market creation entirely and the government is just all about the scientific research?
I think the government in the U.S. especially is pretty careful to say that their initiative is focusing at the very early stages and the basic research level. That's the role of government, and they need to be sure and do that. And I think industry would say the same. Now, the hype this is not unique to quantum. It happens whenever there's a hot new field and a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. You know, when the human genome was matched and there was a belief that everybody was going to have personalized medicine overnight or something, there was I'm sure, a flurry of startups and companies claiming that they were going to be able to cure various diseases or something. So it's a sort of, there's the Gartner hype cycle, right? That's for a reason. And you can see all the different technologies that they review and place on that cycle. So it's something that I think the sort of people understand in somewhat instinctively, but sorting through it is a challenge. And so I think that organizations like QED-C and some of the more independent market watchers can do a service by providing sort of the best available information to the community.
So I'm going to jump from science to education. I know this is not your field, but I'll ask anyway. One of the ways how government could help these commercial companies deliver on their promise is by training and educating enough people in quantum computing, quantum sciences. Do you see that this is happening in the US, or do you have knowledge of any other countries, how they're looking at PhDs and students in physics, for example?
So we, at QED-C, we did do a study within the last year or so. We interviewed, or we surveyed our members, our corporate members, and asked them, and those are big companies and small companies, and we asked them, what positions do you think you're going to be looking to fill in the next 5 years? We asked them to sort of project to the future. And we had a big list of positions, and they could add other, write in other candidate positions as well. And for each time they checked a position, we asked, for that position, what skills do you want the person to have, and what degree would you prefer them to have? And so we had a very kind of rich set of data about what the industry sees as being needed. And interestingly, the majority of positions did not require a PhD. And certainly physics was not the only discipline that they were interested in. A lot of engineering, and then also sort of marketing and business skills were repeated often. And so when we looked and said, what are the sort of skills and knowledge that are most frequently checked by one of the respondents, and we looked at all those skills, most of them were not quantum specific. Even when they were technical, they would be something like photonics engineer. Now, they may want someone who has had a course in quantum so they understand the basic principles, but often you do not need a quantum specific degree. And so while I think these programs that are being created for a quantum engineering master's degree and so on will produce really qualified people to go out into careers in this area, it's not necessary for someone to start a career to have one of those degrees. They maybe just take one or two additional courses to get some quantum literacy or familiarity, in addition to their deeper expertise in another field that's relevant. So in terms of the number of people that are being educated by the system, I mean, it's hard to know. We don't have a great handle, I think, on the number that are being produced, depending on how you define that. But you can look and see how many jobs are open and, people are looking, and that number seems to be going up. So there seems to be a growing demand for sure. And eventually the pipeline will sort of fill, you'll get some equilibration, and the system the market will work in a sense. In the interim, because it takes several years to get an advanced degree, even a master's, it would be very helpful to have some courses or ways by which someone who is perhaps recently graduated or in mid-career even, who wants to pivot into the field to get some additional skills. And that's where I think universities can offer those, and some are. They can have credentialing programs, even sort of special boot camps and things that are fairly condensed and short that people can take advantage of. Professional societies have a role to play here. And I think that that's something that would really help in the short term to fill the gap between supply and demand on the workforce side.
That sounds very encouraging if we all want to see quantum becoming a real industry with real commercial players that make profit one day. And I think QED-C, just the fact that we have QED-C, is a proof of that. Seems like you're doing extremely valuable job with this talent study, but also other fields. So your mission at QED-C is to enable and grow a robust commercial quantum-based industry and associated supply chain in the United States. Can you talked a little bit, but can you expand on all the different things that you're doing?
Well, we're very much driven by what our members say they want the organization or association to do for them. And one of the things that they're always interested in is growing their own business and finding new customers and suppliers that can help make sure that they have what they need to do their new business and product development. And so connecting all of the parts of the supply chain and the ecosystem is one thing we try to do. We have started recently a webinar series where we feature a handful of our members every month. It's a publicly available event. Anybody can watch it. And those companies talk a little bit about what they're doing and what they have to offer and how they see themselves playing a role in the new quantum industry. And then we take those webinars and we edit out the videos and put them on our website so that they're easy to find. So we really want to raise awareness about the small, especially the small companies that are getting into this business and have some, in some cases, unique capability or technology or intellectual property. And they're all interested in finding new customers, new partners. They want to work with customers who need something to develop and fill those gaps in what they need. So we're always looking for ways to connect the different parts of the supply chain. And we also we run workshops where we really do a deep dive on a particular technology to understand what's the state of the art, where does it need to be, so identifying the gap, and then making some recommendations on what might be done to help address the gap. And sometimes it's maybe something very fundamental. We need to understand how materials behave at low temperatures. That might be something that a government agency could address in its sort of R&D program. And they could host a place where you could go and get those materials properties and they would be vetted and you could have confidence that it was good quality data, for example. Sometimes it's the recommendation is for something that's very proprietary or commercial. We want to standardize sample chambers so that there's interoperability or something like that. Then the companies can go and sort that kind of thing out. And in between, there is a need sometimes for advancements where QED-C can play a role by bringing the industry together with government partners and jointly funding some pre-competitive work that's going to help all of those parties be able to solve their problems and move forward in a way faster. So we're working to both identify the gaps and find ways to fill the gaps. And we're just now about to launch a set of projects, research projects that we're funding in partnership with government and sort of cost sharing. You mentioned earlier, industry sometimes is asked to contribute as well. And hopefully we'll be able to fill some of those gaps. And if that works, we look forward to being able to do that more often in the future. But many of our most sort of important efforts, I think, are really about bringing together the various parts of a community that need to be together. Another example, for instance, is we had a workshop that was looking at what's needed between the software and the hardware so that you can perhaps run multiple software applications on the different hardware that's being developed. Today, that's not possible. And it's hard, actually. Right now, the hardware is so specific, it may be too early to create some kind of a compiler or intermediate layer that allows for that kind of, just like your PC versus your Mac. You can run lots of software on both of those platforms very easily. It's transparent to the user. When will we be ready to do that kind of creating those kinds of connections or building the stack from the hardware to the software, so that for the end user, it's somewhat transparent and they can use different platforms easily. So we're bringing together the community to talk about how that might be done, what that might look like, and decide when is the right time to actually agree upon some, in that case, it's sort of a standard that you're going to come up with.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, you're an economic development forum, but you actually are deep in the core science, and you're also in the product development, developing like beta or proof of concepts and first versions of products for this industry. So that's a very wide scope. One of the questions that I have, and this is probably for European companies who want to come to the US market, is how you're spread out nationally inside the US. Do you see like some of the states being more advanced as opposed to other states, maybe where the national labs are?
So I actually have a map in my office where I started putting a pin every time an organization joined. And it certainly is from coast to coast in the US, but there are some clusters that you see. And one of those is around Boulder, Colorado. And that's where you have both the University of Colorado, which has a very strong history in the physics related to quantum, and our National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, has a facility there, and that's where a lot of the quantum experts are. And that's, causing a cluster to form, and a lot of small companies now are in that area as well. And they have also some big industry that's probably going to be a user of quantum, the aerospace industry, for example. So that's looking like a cluster to me. There are obvious sort of concentrations around traditional technology-oriented parts of the U.S. in the California, in the Bay Area, and around Boston, and really kind of around the Washington, D.C. area as well. So it's pretty spread out. And there's, I think, likely to be some new funding available from the government for innovation hubs. There's a lot of talk about that, and it's not specifically for quantum, but I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't, if those hubs get created, that there would be one or more perhaps that would be focused on quantum. Meanwhile, you mentioned these labs and the big Department of Energy funded quantum research centers, and they have 5 of them now. And those also, because just the scale of each of those being roughly $125 million a piece over several years, they are also naturally going to create a cluster or a center of mass around them. And finally, I will say that Chicago and the Chicago Quantum Exchange and the partnership between the University of Chicago, Argonne National Laboratory, Fermilab, all in the Chicago area, as well as considerable investment by philanthropy and Chicago-based entrepreneurship programs, is creating quite a strong center of excellence around Chicago.
Okay, well, 125 million per lab, that's more than many countries who are quite advanced are putting from their country national budgets into quantum. So QED-C, you are advancing American customers and clusters and to grow and thrive. And you mentioned many of your members seek for new markets. Would those markets be outside of the US as well?
Absolutely. So I am happy to share with you that QED-C from the beginning intended to eventually be more international and to have partnerships and opportunities for membership from organizations that were not based in the U.S. And we're just now rolling out membership opportunities for non-U.S. based companies. Now, I will say that our U.S.-based companies are also multinational in many cases. Companies like IBM and Google and Amazon, of course, are multinational companies. They may be developing their quantum products here at home, but they are deploying them already around the world. And in many cases, there's a a wonderful quantum research facility in the Netherlands that's supported by Microsoft, for example. And so innovation in quantum is definitely happening globally. The markets are global. Everybody, is interested in having superior quantum computing capability and secure communications, and sensors are needed all over. So the markets are global. The supply chains are global because there are some highly innovative companies outside the US, and that's understood. So QED-C, with the support of the U.S. government, frankly, is very interested in engaging with partners outside the borders of the U.S. And so we'll be doing that in a sort of stepwise fashion, and starting with 10 countries that are sort of our closest partners in the world today, and that have these shared values that we want to assure that all the members have. And over time, we'll be expanding further, I'm sure.
Wonderful. That was going to be my last question to you. So our audience is US and European, some Asian, but mostly from the US and Europe. So I was going to ask you, what would your message be to the European governments now that US has been doing this for several years and you have some successes? So what if, you're a European government and you're not yet invested in quantum? How should you be looking at this?
Well, I want to remind you and your listeners that QED-C is not a government agency. We have some funding from the government, but really we're more and more supported by the members who are from industry and other parts of the ecosystem. So we really, really appreciate our startup funds from the government, but we're not representing the U.S. government, certainly. And so if I were to give advice to other governments, I would encourage them to reach back to the U.S. government, which is very interested in using quantum as almost a sort of first case of how to develop and bring forward an emerging technology in a new kind of way. This is a technology where there's no one country can assume that they have the leadership around the world. And so they all are going to get more economic benefit, have greater national security of their own if they do the appropriate kind of partnerships. And so that's happening government to government. And just last week, there was a joint statement signed between the UK and the US on collaboration for quantum. And I would not be surprised to see those kinds of declarations and statements of intent to be put in place with many other countries that are, partners. And so I would look forward to those being put in place with many European countries, but you have to follow through. Just signing the paper is the first step. After that, it needs to be made real. It needs to be sort of operationalized somehow. And so, we'll be looking for ways on the industry side to do partnerships with our UK counterparts and finding areas where we have common problems for workforce and other areas. And hopefully we'll be able to expand the network to include many other countries and regions as well.
There we have it. Celia Merzbacher, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've listened to Deep Pockets by Petra Soderling. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes.